Recording.
Welcome everyone to our class on Sefer Melitza. We're at the last chapter of the Sefer, where the Ramchal now is going to explain how to motivate an audience. I think we would call this in the secular world public speaking. Before we were talking about a communication between individuals and how to motivate individuals, but now you want to do it on a large scale, and you don't have the, as I was going to say, the haskama, the agreement between the person listening and the person talking to understand it, to be motivated, so to speak. It's a wide audience, and you're going to have to adjust accordingly. So in this last chapter, which he calls Ma'amar al-Hadrasha, he's going to explain how to address an audience, which you may have to be doing very shortly. Hine, ad heina ba'arnu mashra ui la'adam harotze l'hagid hagara pratit oder etzot al inyan prati muskam etzlo lahagido oder etzot alav. Up to this point, we've explained, says the Ramchal, the proper way of a person who wants to communicate information in a one-to-one situation, pratit in a private situation, or to motivate in a private situation. Muskam etzlo. Now, if you have this is how I understand it. I spoke with my chaver also. Muskam etzlo lahagido, that means there's an agreement between the presenter and the person who is listening to hear the information or to be moved by it. Okay, so that's what's called a private form of communication. Omnam zulat kol ze yesh inyan hadorush hanohag etzel hachachamim. There's another level of communication, which is called the drush, or let's call it the speech. V'hu klal hagada misuderet letachlisa lilamed leklal hashomim chachma o musa. Now that this drush is a method to a systematic method whose goal is to teach a group of people either wisdom or ethics. There's no real haskama or agreement between the presenter and the audience. Okay, the audience is there, but we'll see that it's not that intimate relationship. Ella shilamed inyan ma oyeta lev hashomim el inyan ma. The Dorish is going to present his speech to the audience, and the audience may not be aware of what he wants to present or motivate them to. Ulam yesh linyan hazeh סדורים שונים ומשפטים מתחלפים כפי מנהגם שונים שנהגו בם יושבי הארצות איש לפי דרכו. So he says this type of communication to an audience has a different type of seder, different type of organization, and different types of laws. And it changes according to the people who you're dealing with. In other words, even in different countries, you'd have different manners of presentation. However, in general, the Ramchal, in his inimical way, is going to make certain basic rules which should encompass the general methods of, let's call it, public speaking. There's two types of addresses or public speaking. The min rishon sheyibocher lo hadoresh inyan echad. The person who's going to give his presentation picks one topic. V'alav yisov kol dorshov, and on that particular point, his whole speech will be centered upon. Levarer mashish levarer bo, to explain what that particular topic is, what has to be explained in that specific topic. Ularot emitato berayato shonot, and to bring proofs that what he's saying about that specific topic will indeed be true. So he's going to have to explain the topic, and he's also going to have to prove that what he's saying is true. but it's all based upon one focal point. When I was teaching in America, they used to tell us, write on the blackboard, today's aim, you know. So there's a single aim, and we're going to now focus on that message. What's the second type? The second type, he says, where the person who's giving the speech is going to now wander from one subject to the next, to a different subject, which are essentially different. However, but it will have a central theme, but it won't be focused on a central point. Derech mashal, shiyu kulam be'inyan pasha min pasha shebetara. Say a person wants to now give a little talk on the pasha shavua. Okay, so he may pick different elements, and the cement that glues that little talk will be today's parsha. Or a person can go from one topic to the next because that second topic is a result of the first topic, or an offshoot of the first topic. So basically you have a single topic exposition and you have a multi-topic exposition, and even the multi-topic exposition is not free association, but it's based on a certain order, be it certain parsha shavua or a certain set of ideas, which one follows the next.
So you're saying they're related. In other words, the inyan is chalfim ma'ashenim, but they're related to one another.
They're related, but they're not because one would be the next result. For instance, here in the beginning of Melitza, he said, now that we finished our talk on Sefer Higayon, the next logical progression should be a talk in Melitza. Now, Melitza and Higayon are two separate studies. Okay, of course, there's an interrelationship, as he explained, but it's a midrega that follows after. So they're two different topics. One is logic and one is rhetoric. But I could talk about them because they have a relationship one to the other. One follows the other, okay? But it doesn't have to be that tightly related, as he said. It could just be because they share the same book in the Chumash. But there always has to be one central theme. You can't just talk about a unrelated set of ideas. So, but some ideas are different and related, and sometimes your speech is going to be focused about one sole topic. Okay? So he says like this. Those are the two types, and he's going to explain both these types. V'hinei l'kol echad mishnei aminim mishpatim yuchadim kefi inyan hamin hazeh. He explains that each one of these two types have peculiar or unique laws that are fitting for that type and not the other type. So the min rishon is, what he said was, Sheyesov hadorish al kotev miyuchad. The first type is a single topic talk, which is focused on one idea. The kotev is a pole, you know, I mean, like the pole of the earth. So it's focused on one idea. Umishpatav klalim b'shlosh klalim vehem. The basic rules when it comes to giving a talk on one topic can be broken down into three parts. What he calls hamsa'ah, which is, he'll define as finding the what to talk about and the proofs for it. The seder, which is the way, the steps of presentation, and the last part is what he calls the tikkun, or to say what you're saying in the proper style. Let's see how he defines that. Hamsa'ah. What's hamsa'ah? Hamsa'ah inyan shalav yidrosh. Well, hamsa'ah means discovery. Okay, now we've learned in the end of Sefer Higayon, as he's going to repeat over here, how he goes about the idea of discovering new ideas. But you always have to speak about something that is a chiddush to your audience. You won't be telling them things that they already know. So now where do you generate this type of information? So he breaks down this discovery program, Hamsa'or Inyan Shalav Darish, to Hamsa'or Ha'inyan, finding the subject to speak about, and V'hamsa'os Harayesh Shochichu Amito, and finding proofs that what you're saying is true. So you have to find a fitting topic to speak about, and then when you do find that topic, you must prove that what you're saying is true. Those are the two parts, and now we're going to break down those two parts as he always does. What's the source of finding subject matter? He says, Makom motzei ha'inyanim hanidrashim hu klal ha'echad v'esrim havchanot shebaharnu b'gayon. He says, if you want to discover what to say about any topic, then you'll utilize my 21 havchanot to help you and guide you to talk about any topic. As we explained in Sefer Melitza R, you're going to have to talk about the whole, you're going to talk about the parts, you're going to have to talk about the cause, you're going to have to talk about if it's the cause, what type of cause, the cause that gives birth to a thing, the cause that keeps it going, the Mekayem is the cause that destroys it, etc., etc. So that's why he wrote all of Sefer Melitza R, to give you to give us a toolbox of concepts that we can apply to what we're learning, and then say, look, do I really understand in marriage what is who are the two actors, the cause of marriage, the man, the woman, what is the material that has to be transferred from one to the next, etc., etc., etc. So if I go through the 24 havchanot and I ask myself those questions, I should be able to cover a topic sufficiently, and that's what he calls the makor hamsat inyanim, to discover all the various aspects of any topic I'm trying to explain. V'zeh, why is that true? Ki hine kol gezer shetiyeh, any statement that you make, eino ela kiyum o shlili nasu b'nosei. Any statement that you create, that you create, is just a juxtaposition of subject and predicate, and saying that X the subject is B, or X the subject is not B. V'kol nasu shekum yisholel lo yeh ela kafi echad me'echad esrim havchanotein. And you're always talking about an aspect of the subject. The predicate, the nasu, is always saying something about the subject. It's either talking about what caused the subject, the parts of the subject, the etymological root of the subject. But a no-say is a no-say, and now the predicate to the no-say is explaining something about it. So if you use the 21 havchanot that he explained in Higayon and ask yourself the question, well, what are its parts, what are its cause, what keeps it going, what destroys it, etc., 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 and then you think about that and discover the solutions to those questions, then you'll be able to completely cover a topic. And that's how he creates these svarim, by the way. Okay, no matter what topic he looks at, whether it's Higayon or rhetoric or Derek Tfunos, learning Gemara, he is doing it by consciously analyzing the topic, asking himself these questions that he asked in Sefer Melitza R, and then presenting his material in an orderly way. So that's what he says. He says, if you want to know the source of information, so that's the 21 havchanot. Now, of course, we're not minimizing the work that goes into answering those questions, but at least what he did was create a structure to use to guide us to give a complete coverage of any topic we do. And that's what he says. So he says, as we explained over in Higayon, "Umimash tzar sheteda shulam lo kol gezer shetiyeh tiyeh inyan ru'ui lehidoresh." You have to know that not every statement that you want to talk about is fitting to explain. He says the only thing worth communicating is either ethics or wisdom. That's what he says.
So what is he coming to exclude?
What else are you going to explain? So those are two basic boxes. Well, you wouldn't want to be talking about what you ate yesterday to an audience.
Right. Although you find that today, you listen to some, you don't hear it in Israel, but you have some of these radio talk shows where they talk about everything under the sun, which is. But, but I guess
exactly. So that's called bittul zman.
Right.
I mean, we can talk about the Yankees and the Baltimore Orioles. You know what I mean? But that's called bittul zman. I mean, there's no wisdom unless you're going to now tell me there's people get into it. But basically, a lot of people just waste their time because their communication has no substance. Okay. Now, especially if you stand up in front of a crowd. If you want to talk with your wife and ask what's for lunch, it's one thing. But if you're going to stand in front of an audience and say, well, today I had a wonderful dinner and especially prepared, wine, okay, it doesn't interest anyone. It's not wisdom that you're communicating, and it's not any ethical message that you're communicating. So then why are we sitting here in the audience to hear that? So he says when you publicly speak, you better check out the tochen, the substance of what you have to say, and make sure what you have to say is significant. It's either going to teach them some wisdom or teach them some ethical message. That's what he says. In the Gemara, we have halacha, we have agada. Those are the two basic parts. Either we're transmitting the halachas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or we're transmitting the ethical values of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we just don't talk about the weather. Okay, now he says like this. Interesting enough here, he says, "Musarin yoter haguna." When you're talking to an audience, ethics is a more preferable topic of communication. It doesn't explain why. Maybe it's so you can reach a wider audience that way. You'll see, because when he talks about talking about an audience, we'll see in a second, he's talking about a broad audience. He's not talking about a one-on-one relationship or a class of people who are coming to learn mathematics. Okay, he's talking about a broader, like a rabbi giving a sermon. Where he doesn't have control over the people who are there. Okay, so he says in that case, for broader audience, it's better to talk about ethics than to talk about topics of wisdom, because you probably make everyone fall asleep. But Sarah Shetiyeh, excluding our audience here, which are who have haskama to learn these things. But Sarah Shetiyeh amitis ba'atzmam ach lo mufarsemet. An important rule. Of course, you can't talk about anything that's self-evident, because no one has come to listen to something self-evident. But it has to be something that's not, remember, mufarsam. Mufarsam means that there's no general understanding of that concept. It's not clearly understood. It may be that there's some chachamim that understand it or appreciate it, but the broader general audience that you're trying to reach would not know it, or else why you're having them sit in front of you. Ki murfasam ot ein tzarech raya. Things that are clear, self-evident. Remember, he said there's axiomatic proofs there in Derek Tfunos, and then there's things called common sense. So both of those things are not fitting for a lecture. V'kol mashir beba min hachiddish asher lo she'aru hashomim hine hi mishubach. He says everything that is more of a novel idea that the audience would not have thought about is more praiseworthy. So the more dramatic the topic that you pick to present to the audience, the better it is. You're going to be more effective as a speaker.
So this is definitely something to keep in mind for Shabbat Brachas.
So that's the first one. Yeah, exactly. Right. Okay. We have to do these articles every week too. So this week we did it on the stock market, on the on the Israeli jewelry business, which is something. It's almost 10% of Israel's export is not jewelry, diamonds. Like $8 billion in the diamond industry. So that's an exciting topic because I called it "Is Diamonds Israel's Best Friend?" So, but anyway, what it is, so it has to be something. If it's a chiddush that people, and that's the whole idea of nooks and crannies. We go to places where people wouldn't be able to go. We had to have our fingerprints taken over there and pictures and big tags and whatnot to get into those buildings. So you go to places where people don't go, and when you speak, you want to, the more of a novel idea that no one thought about, the better is your presentation. Now, so that was the first part. That's called Hamsa'o Ha'inyan. Remember, that means to discover the information that you want to communicate, the content. But besides the information, he has a second part. You have to prove what you have to say. Now, if you're going to say a big chiddush, as we learned in Darkei Gemara, right? If it's such a big chiddush, you're going to have to bring a proof. Now, to bring a proof to what you have to say, since you knocked your audience off your feet, you have to bring it from two sources. It's going to be an internal proof. We're going to say that our statement, I'll explain in a second, our statement which knocked you off your feet is actually the product of two provable premises. That's called Rayas Ha'atzmi'it, an essential proof. And the second one, Hasheni Hamsaos Rayas HaMikrit. They're proofs from the Mikra. Okay? In our world, of course, that means the Chumash or the Gemara or the Meforshim. Okay, that's a Raya Mikrit. It's perish. Here he goes. Perish. Kihine ha'inyan yumat. When we try to demonstrate the truth of something, it either has to be done mitzad atzmam, internally, the yumat mitzad chutz, the yumat mitzad chutz miyana, or externally. You have to bring an internal and external proof. And he's going to explain it. Mitzad atzman hu, shiyimatzu hekeshim amitim, shebetoldasam yetzeh. You find premises that will result in the statement that you're trying to present. That's called an internal proof. Your statement is a result of two true premises, or maybe even more. What does it mean, mitzad amitas, excuse me, I'd like to read it again. Shemitzad asman hu shimotzu ha'keshim emitim shebetoldasam yetzeh inyahu mitzad emitis mashahu. According to the truth of what it says. In other words, we went all through this with Higayon and with Tunos. You have to make sure your terms are correct and the statements are indeed provable. So the premises are provable in themselves, and the form of the syllogism you're using is correct, whether it's indirect or direct, etc., etc. What does it mean to bring a proof from outside the statement? Mitzad chutz mimenu hu sheyamsa'u kusuvim umamrei rabbeinu sheyamituhu v'ze nekra raya mikris. That's when you bring a statement from the Tanakh or from Mamrei Chazal to prove the truth of what you have to say. V'ze, then that's what he calls a raya mikris. Okay, so that was his exposition of where information comes from. He says you can generate it from using his 24 havchanot, and then you have to bring proofs. Where do they come from? Well, they either come from other premises which are provable true, and this is a result of that of those premises, or they come from the Tanakh, which we hold. That's what he called, remembering Tunos, Kabbalah, Mikubal. That's Mikubal for us to be true, and that's therefore you can prove your point that way.
So what it means, mitzad atzma just means that
yes.
The mitzad atzma just means proofs of similar concepts.
From Hekesh.
From Hekesh.
Proof from Hekesh.
As
opposed...
Right. The word atzma he's using means from the idea itself. That's probably...
Exactly. You directly prove the idea from a set of other premises. Okay, that's, with internal and external, as opposed to going to an external source, which is the Tanakh, and saying it's true because it says so in Mamre Chazal. That's what he calls an external source. Okay, both of them are very good proofs, but those are the two methods you have to use. You have to say that your statement is a result of other true premises, or your statement is true because it comes from a Kabbalah of the Torah and Chazal. V'hine, b'shteihem ru'ui shiumat inyan hadorosh. Both of them should be used in your sermon. We'll call it a sermon, a lecture. I don't know what other connotations those words have, but when you're speaking in front of the audience, you should use both types. You should bring proofs internally and externally. Perish, b'hekeshim, he says it clearly here. Perish, b'hekeshim, ubekasubin omamarim. You have to bring it from both those sources. It has to be the result of hekeshim. Those hekeshim, we said, could come from a long chain of axiomatic. You have to go back to an axiomatic proof, but it could be a very long chain of proof, but it has to come from the statement you want to say has to be a result of other premises, or you can bring it because it says so in the Tanakh. And you should actually, when you're trying to present your topic, you should use both of them, he says. The proper way of presenting your lecture, your sermon, is that you should find very strong proofs to the truth of what you have to say. Mochicho so beberu, that clearly prove your point, ba'ofin shiodelehem seichel shomo, in such a way that your audience has to agree. Okay, so it's very important to consider your audience, what they're listening to, and design your proof so that it'll have the proper effect, that they'll actually Mikabo receive what you have to say. Va'afal pikein bihiyos hamon shomim mikubatz michachamim v'amei haaretz, and here it says it clearly. Most of your audience, you're talking to a general audience, is going to be a mix of people who are wise and people who are simple people. Gedolim v'katanim, people who have status in society, and people who are very lowly in society. Therefore, when you present your piece, you should bring proofs that's going to talk to both those audiences. Now, after we discuss this chapter, it's very exciting. What I did with my chaver yesterday was to go through the introduction to Derek Tfunos, to Mesil Yesharim. and there you'll see that he breaks up the world into these two parts of people who are wise and who are educated and people who are simple. And he shows over there how both of these groups of people need to learn his book, which is the whole idea of writing the Hakdama, because since the wise people don't give it time because they're too busy doing other things, they neglect the study, which is a chachma, and the simple don't have the intellectual prowess to delve into the topic, so they translate the topic into fasting and all sorts of forms of self-abuse, which has nothing to do with the real wisdom of knowing Kodesh Baruch Hu. So he addresses in that little introduction, which is something that I hope we'll have time to look at, to a broad audience. And that's very, very interesting because I wouldn't say most people, many people forget that the audience out there is a mixed audience and they speak only to the to the top level, let's say, the people, and lose everyone else, or they speak to the lowest level and lose everyone else too. So he says you have to be aware of your audience, and the proofs that you're bringing to the topic that you're discussing should be sufficient for both those type of people. He said you have to pick proofs that will be understandable to both those types of people. And since these two groups are not equal in their natural gifts,
says the word they're not
they're
intellect. They're intellect, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, Siklam. I'm sorry. Their intellect is not equal. Okay. Gam harayas rui shitiyena bilti shavos. And therefore, since their intellect is not on the same level, so then therefore your proof also in your, we'll call it the sermon or your presentation, should also exist on the, relate to those multiple levels of people you're speaking to. V'hainu, sheyeh behem chazakot, atzumot, va'amukot, sheyos el seichel hachachamim. They should be strong, come from a result of true premises, atzmit. They should be deep, not very, in other words, it could be very complex proofs that you bring, fitting for the wise. V'acherem yoter kalos, and other ones should be more simple. Naos el haseichel habilti chacham v'ketanim, that will be pleasant to those people who are not wise, and don't have that type of brain power, young, let's say.
So you really have to put a lot of thought into it, because it's easier to think about how to explain things to somebody who's on your own level. If you consider yourself a chacham, it's probably harder to figure out how to explain things to somebody who's not a chacham and really break it down into the pieces in order to be able to bring proofs on a lower level. But
exactly,
he expects you to do both.
And he wants you, and that's called real communication, or else it's called losing your audience or part of your audience. And he wants to capture the whole audience. That's why you'll see in his book Mesil Shasharim, everybody reads it, right? Everyone can. The Vilna Gaon reads it, and children pick up the book on their bar and they also read it, okay? Because he has this ability to relate to his audience, but as you said, it comes from an awareness of the needs of your audience. It's a very, very important point. Now, od mehem re'ui shetiyena chotchos umehen masbir od. Now, what does that mean? Dahainu shiru hadavar karov af al pi shelo yaru'uhu muchrach. It's very interesting here, these two words. He says they should be chot, that means very cutting, exact, and if something comes with two true premises, then there's no way to do it. But also you should add what he calls musparot. What's musparot? That means they make sense. It may not have the strength of being the product of two true given premises, but it makes a lot of sense. Okay, like we look at in Mesil Shasharim over there, he says that first he demonstrates that Gira, for instance, is a chachma's wisdom, and then he says, look, if since it's a wisdom, then it's a svara. It means a natural reasoning that you're going to have to put time and effort into it. It's not something that's just going skip over lightly. You have to take it very seriously. So that's a svara. Okay, so he has a pasuk that says, "Hein yiras Hashem is chachma." That's Mariah Mikris that tells us that yiras Hashem is wisdom, and then he says, "Well, if it's wisdom, all wisdom requires time." Okay, that's a svara. You'll say not so, but I mean that's karov ladas. Even though he didn't bring a raya to the fact, but everybody can understand that wisdom takes time to grasp. Okay, so that is his first exposition. He explained to us the content and the source of information and how to bring a proof. and consider your audience and bring proofs to a broad scale of people who may be coming, since we don't have this agreement between the speaker and the audience here. Okay, so now he says, let's talk about Seder, Sidur. Who Sidur Kol Arayos Shizachanu. Now we're going to talk about how do you present. Now you have you have your information, you have your proofs. Now how do you arrange that in order to make an effective talk? Sidur who Sidur Kol Arayos Shizachanu. Sidur, and remember, the Ramchal always defines his terms. Okay, so you always have to understand what he's saying through the definition of what he's saying. Okay, you can't say, okay, the Siddur is something I daven from. But so he defines his terms, you have to understand his terms, and then you understand how he builds his building. He says, Hasidahu Sidor Kol Harayos Shizachanu. It's the way that you order and arrange all the proofs that we just spoke about. Masharui Lios Betchila, Masharui Lios Besof. What should be presented first, what should be presented at the end. V'zeh, why is that? Ki hinei re'ui l'doresh shi'achalach rayosav yasim hachazikos perishona. Very interesting concept he says here. The proper way to give a talk is to take your strongest proof and present it first. Why is that true? Ki im harishonis tiyeh chalashot hinei kvar yarapel lev shomo. Because if you start off with a weak proof, you're going to lose your audience. The minds of the people listening will just turn off and won't pay attention anymore. Because what do they say? Just like the beginning, so the rest will follow the same thing. It's very, very weak. And once you learn once you lose that initial punch, even if you sweeten it up later on with strong proofs, you may have lost your audience. You won't be able to get them back again, because they already shut their ears off. So your first hit has to be very, very powerful and very, very strong. That'll prove to the audience that they have something to listen to. Okay. Now, he says also at the end of your talk you have to be very powerful too. Why? Because a phrase, everything goes after the finishing mark. Any weak proofs that you have, you should put them in the middle. So that's his system. As far as Seder is concerned, start off with your most powerful punch. Okay, you make your statement, but then you're going to have to bring your proof. So it has to be a very, very powerful proof that the people who are listening will say, "Ah, this person has something to say. There's something very meaningful to say." In the beginning, you can slack off, and at the end, you have to get powerful again. Very, very interesting. I do these, these articles, and it's well known that when you write an article, your first line has to catch the audience. If you don't catch them in the first line, then they'll just move on to the next thing. In the middle, you can calm down. At the end, also, you give them a powerful lift, or Okay, and that's the way to produce, and that's what he says. Okay, good, very good. So that's the way you're going to present your argument. The third thing, that's the Seder, and the third thing is what he calls Tikkun. What's Tikkun? Hu Tikkun halashon kefi kol chukas Sefer Melitza. Now Tikkun is to now beautify what you have to say. You have to now go to another, after you've got what you have to say and the proofs that what you have to say is correct, and you've ordered them properly. Now you're going to have to look for clothing to make your language as beautiful as possible, which was this whole Sefer Melitza was talking about. Okay, Hu shitachem lashon kafi kol hachukas hamalitza shebaharnu b'sefer hamalitza. It means to fix up the language now with all the principles that I taught you in Sefer Melitza. Behishomer mikol ma shemeisir hayofi v'hanoa mehasipor. Also, you have to get rid of anything that will take away from the beauty and the pleasantness of your speech. Remember, even when it comes to using too many gutturals. Okay. ובהשתמש מן היפויים כפי העניין והתכלס המתבקש. And also, to use this beautification of language, you have to be very careful, as you warned us in Sefer Gaon before, that it has to be fitting to the subject matter that you're doing, and also to the tachlis. You may need to appeal to emotion to the audience. If it's something that they're not relating to emotionally, you may have to pull back excuse me, and not be so emotional if the topic requires more of an intellectual communication. But that type, as he said, this beautification of language, which we call rhetoric, has to be done very, very carefully. And it's, although he gave us rules, he said, remember that it's an art. But it's, again, something that he considered, and he's asking us to consider when we give our talk. V'hine, Ra'u chachmei hamalitza hiyos ra'ui sheyabonei hadarash me'arba chalakim v'hem. Now he said, those people that know how to present information, the chachmei hamalitza, the people who know how to use rhetoric, they found that basically your talk should be divided into 4 parts. What are they? The Hagdama, which is the introduction, the Haggadah, a exposition of what you want to talk about, the Hochachot, the proofs that what you're saying is true, and finally the Chitum, the summation. Okay, so he's now going to go through these 4 parts and explain them to us. So your speech should be made up of these 4 parts: an introduction, a presentation of the content of what you want to say, proofs, and finally conclusion. Now he'll go through them. Hagdama. What is the Hagdama? Hu sipor ma sheyakadem l'darush. Very interesting. What comes before your actual presentation of the information? What does it do, the Hagdama? Yachin libot hashomim lama shenavo v'nidrash lahem. It's a preparation that prepares the listeners' hearts for what is going to come to follow. Okay, it's like having the hors d'oeuvre in the meal. Okay, it has to set them up so that they'll want to hear the content of what you have to say. V'ulam sipor zeh re'ui she'os el. Excuse me. V'ulam sipor zeh. This introduction, this little introduction. Re'ui she'ot el guf hadarosh be'echu sukamaso. But it's not just you say an unrelated joke. It has to be something that is fitting for the content, both quantitatively and qualitatively. And he's going to explain it. What does it mean? Ve'echuto. Shia inyanei mityaches im inyan hanir selamito. Of course, the introduction has to relate to the content of your speech. Ve'omnam ein lo liot me'etzem ha'inyan hanidrash. But it's not supposed to be the content itself. It's an hors d'oeuvre. It's an introduction. So, for instance, we'll just say, "Ve'im kain eino hagdama alav." If it's the content itself, it's not called a preface. Aval hu ha'inyan ba'atzmo. It's not the preface. It's the content itself. So, for instance, in Mesil Shasharim, he has Hagdama in chapter 1. What is Hagdama? What is the Hagdama to the book? The Hagdama of the book is to explain to the audience why you should be interested in fixing your middos. Okay, it prepares the heart. It gets you ready to do the work of understanding the content. But first, why should you read this book? Or why should you listen to this lecture? So you have to motivate the people to listen to the content of what you have to say. And that's done in the Hagdama. So it has to be related to the content, but not the content itself, because it's a first course and it's an hors d'oeuvre. It's something that will whet their appetite to be involved in the topic that you want to present.
So maybe describing what you're going to speak about in order to get people interested. You could, it's like a headline. That's what the newspaper does, right? It puts a headline on the front so that you should want to pick it up and read what it says.
Exactly. Okay. Right. So in all advertising, right? They have to put the girl there. What does the girl have to do with the car or with the Magimix? You know what I mean? Because that's the Siba Moreris, as we learned in Higayon, the cause that'll excite you to go to the next thing. We didn't want to talk about the car, but we can't get you to talk about the car. Okay, there, of course, it's unrelated. I mean, it could be related, but we're not going to talk about how the relationship is. But the point is, you have to whet the appetite of the audience to go and involve themselves in the content of what you have to say. So we said, like Masil Sasham, he proves there that the study of Mussar is something that both the wise and the simple have to do. Now, once you understand why you have to do it, if you're a wise person, well, the reason is because it's a wisdom, and like any other wisdom, it takes depth of study. And if you're simple, then your ideas are not going to be clear. So both those audiences have to learn Mussar. So once you identified, you're either, as he said here, I'm Oretz or a Chacham, and both of you need it. So now you understand why. You should now go into the topic. Okay, so that's the Hagdama. So he says, rule one, it should have, of course, a relation to what you're trying to prove as true. But it's not the topic itself. It's just something to get you into the topic. Because if you're going to start talking about the topic in the introduction, then you're talking about the content and you're not talking about the reason why you should be involved in the content. So what is the proper thing to do is to pick an inyan which is related to the subject matter. For instance, why should you learn this book? And should be very close to the content in such a way that it will be nimshach mimeno, from this Hagdama, that people will be drawn to the levels or the madrigas of understanding this book. As he explains there in the Seal Shashar in the beginning, he brings Reb Pinchas Ben Yair. He says, after I prove to you why it's so necessary to learn Mussar, I found this Chazal in the Bryce of Pinchas Ben Yair, and it says Torah leads to Zehiras Arizos. He gives you the whole chain, and now you're already on the train. You know you're going to have to go through Zehiras and Zerizas and Nikiyas and Precious, but you're already motivated to start moving down the line. It is possible that the Hagdama, Hagdama al Metzius ha'inyan ha'nidrash ba'atzmo ve'efshar tiyeh al pu'ulos ha'darush perish al bo'enu lidroshahu. What does this mean? Ukvar efshar tiyeh Hagdama al Metzius ha'inyan ha'nidrash ba'atzmo. I don't know what that means exactly. Maybe you can translate that. I can translate the words, but I don't get the point. Ve'efshar tiyeh al pulos hadarish perish al bo'enu lidroshahu.
Again, that's the
He says the number could be on the reality of the topic that you're going to want to explain.
Well, Pula
Or
said
it
just
could be
probably.
on there.
Yeah, what was Pula said? Just Pula said just mean what is the reason for you speaking?
Yeah.
I mean, if
That,
let's say someone's giving a speech about Musar, and he wants to talk about tznius, he could talk about the reason that he noticed that there's a lack of tznius in the world, and therefore he's going to talk about the topic of tznius to get people interested in listening.
the Mitzius, right. Right.
He's saying, why am I speaking about it? In other words, you could say, I want to tell you something really fascinating.
Yeah, excellent. Now you brought up to my mind, again, the introduction in Mesil Shasharm. He says, if you look at the present situation in the world, no one is learning Tikkun Hamidus. Okay? And I think that's what he means.
Right.
You can talk about the Metzias Inyan. The reality is no one is, I really want to talk about, Tikkun Hamidus. So what do? You say, well, the reality in the world is that no one is actually dealing with this topic. And he goes on to prove how and why. Okay, so maybe that's what he means with Metzias Inyan. Okay. So that's called what he calls Eichos. Again, his Eichos and Kamas, that's the Bechinot that you have to look at when you come to your okay, so qualitatively you have to make sure that you're not going to talk about the topic itself, but this is going to be something that's going to awaken the audience to be involved in the topic. And you can talk about the reality of what's going on or what's happening in the world and why that makes what I'm going to talk about a necessity. What about Kamuso? How long should your introduction be? So he says, Shelo yeh orech yoter midai v'lo katzer midai. It shouldn't be too long and too short. Archarko hanaus be'emes hu orech harosh im haguf. That's what he says. He says the proper hagnama should be in proportion of the head to the body. Okay, if you look at a person's head as in relation to his whole body, that's how big the hagnama should be, as opposed to the body of the talk. Vulam b'sof hagdama, at the end of your introduction, Rui shiomer ha'inyan hanidrosh b'katzer nachon. You should talk about the subject matter that you're going to talk about in a very short manner. Like he always defines what Melitza is at the end of his introduction. He always, in Mesil Shasharm, he'll say, okay, now I'm going to talk about these 10 steps of growth. So you should just give a short summation of the content, and that'll be the end of your Hagdama. Milos shiyaspiku lahagido k'ra'ui, words that are sufficient for the communication of the idea properly. Kafi mishpat ha'agada sheba'arnu ha'malachas melitza, as all these laws, I told you how to make sure that what you're saying is sufficient to communicate the idea. V'zen yikra haggadah. So that's called the Haggadah. Now, Acher Haggadah, so in other words, you have your Hagdama, and in the end you have what he calls the Haggadah, which is a brief description of the content. Acher Haggadah roi shiavo hekeshim v'arayos b'seida hanachon. Now, after you presented your introduction and summarized the content of what you want to speak about, afterwards, step 3 is to bring all your syllogism and proofs in the proper order, as I explained. And that's called the third step, hochacha. You have to prove what you have to say. So from the last step is to do a...
How much more do you want to go before we finish this?
Okay. You know what? I think what we're going to do is just finish. No, we're not going to finish that. So let's stop here. Okay. Okay. Maybe we'll just do the chitum. Yeah, we'll just do the chitum and that's it. Okay. And the last part is what he calls the chitum, the what do you want to say? The conclusion. V'hu shiagzor v'kolel b'kitzer nimratz ikom mashin isbayer. That's a a concluding statement that includes, in a very quick way, what we want to explain, the kavana b'darish kulo, and the intent of the speech, what it's aiming at, v'yirba lahazir ulizarez al hadava b'koach gadol. V'yirba lahazir ulizarez al hadava b'koach gadol. And you should warn the people and make them very excited to enter into the body of the talk. So we'll stop right here.